Hello, my dear students. Our topic for presentation today is pediatric surgical emergencies. Now, this topic may appear distant to you, pediatric surgical emergencies. There are a lot of topics in our life which we hear and have no practical applications in our life. But this topic is different. This is one topic where there is real practical application in life, especially you will remember this topic on a day of your house urgency when you are in pediatric surgery casualty for one day and you will not know how to properly manage these cases and you will be drinking water. So, for that day, this topic is very much important. So, the application level of this topic is like that. Now, this is also a topic which you should learn, because in order to, why should I learn this topic? You should learn this topic in order to prevent that shivering that happens when you see a pediatric surgical case. Initially, whenever in casualty, when a pediatric case comes, we will have some problem. And especially when it is a pediatric surgical case, we may not have any idea. So, in those cases, in order to prevent that shivering when a pediatric surgical case comes, you should learn about this topic, especially when we are working in the periphery or so. So, rather than going through this topic in a theoretical method, I would like to discuss this topic in such a manner that after this topic, after hearing this presentation, you should be able to go and sit in the pediatric surgical casualty and manage the patients. So, we will discuss the topic under the following headings, or depending upon the cases which comes to the pediatric surgical casualty. So, what are those cases? The most common case, around 80% of the case which comes into the pediatric surgical casualty will be abdominal pain. Then there will be acute scrotum. Then there will be foreign bodies. Children are notorious to just ingest, aspirate whatever their foreign body they see in the ground. Then head injury and traumas. Then burns. This type of children are exceptional in coming to the pediatric surgical casualty. Then minor soft tissue injuries, and finally the newborn patients. So these are the cases which comes in pediatric surgery casualty. The most common is abdominal pain. So we'll discuss regarding the abdominal pain. So when a patient with abdominal pain comes, the most common, we can examine the patient. But in most of the time there will be diffuse pain and you will not be able to localize the pain to a quadrant of the abdomen. So what will we do? In those cases, our option is to take an abdominal X-ray. We can clinically examine the patient well and good if you could localize the pain to a quadrant of the abdomen, or if there is an abdominal mass, it is also fine. The most common cause for abdominal pain in pediatric age group is constipation. So, you should take an abdominal X-ray. In the abdominal X-ray, we can see the loaded colon like this. When we see a loaded colon in abdominal X-ray, we can make sure that it is constipation. So, when we see this picture in the abdominal X-ray, most of the children will have this picture. There will be loaded colon in a patient with abdominal pain. So, then what we have to do? Our orders will be evac enema. We have to give an enema, evac enema, or glycerin enema. Paracetamol should be given to relief of the pain, and should reassess the patient after 2 hours. Why should we reassess the patient after 2 hours? Most of the cases of abdominal pain due to constipation will resolve after evac enema. If the pain is still persisting after 2 hours, then it means that it could be a surgical cause. So then what will we do? So we are reassessing after the 2 hours and the pain is persisting after 2 hours. Then we have to go for the diagnostic. We should know whether there is a surgical cause where we can intervene. So we should put the patient on NPO. We should get a full blood workup of the patient, full preoperative blood workup, an ultrasound abdomen, and start the patient on IV fluids. Because the patient is to be kept on NPO due to abdominal pain. So start the patient on IV fluids. So then after this, one of the most common diagnosis will be acute appendicitis, one of the most common diagnoses in pediatric surgery casualty. And then we have to take a decision whether we should operate the patient or not. That the pediatric surgeon on call or on rounds will take, but you should have an idea which all patients you should inform him earlier. So, I have said that IV fluids. How will we start IV fluids for the patient? This is a Holiday-Sagar formula. This is a formula for a lifetime. Okay. So in pediatric surgical patients, we should give 100 ml per kg for the first 10 kg, 50 ml per kg for the next 10 kg, and 20 ml per kg for the next 10 kg. So what does that mean? So suppose it is a 21 kg child, 100 ml per kg for the first 10 kg, so that is 1000 ml. For the next 10 kg, 11 to 20, that is for 50 ml per kg, that is 15 to 10, that becomes 500 ml. So that becomes a 1500 ml. And there is a 1 kg, 21 kg. So for 1 kg, 1 into 20 ml, 20 ml. So 1000 plus 500 plus 20 ml. So the patient should have a maintenance fluid of 1520 ml. That is the way you use Holiday-Sagar formula. You keep this formula for a lifetime, because always when we have to start IV fluids for the pediatric patients, this is the guideline. So that is regarding Holiday-Sagar formula. So whenever you have a confusion to start what fluid, the fluid is isolate P. When the patient nurse puts the cannula, make sure that the investigation is sent then and there. What are the routine preoperative investigations? Complete blood count, blood urea, serum creatinine, seroelectrolyte, sodium, potassium, HbSAg, HIV and anti-HCV, PTINR and APTT. These are the routine preoperative investigations generally we do in our setup. So whenever, in order to avoid frequent pricks and to avoid the workload for the nurses, you should make sure that whenever the IV fluid is put, the investigation should be sent. Avoid more and more pricking on the tiny veins of the child. So that is regarding the Holiday-Sagar formula. Now there are a few exceptions for this. That is, the exceptions, I mean that you cannot, almost all the abdominal pain you can treat in the above method by keep the patient NPO for 2 hours, keep the patient on NPO, evac enema, paracetamol suppository for 2 hours, paracetamol suppository, reassess after 2 hours. This and after 2 hours, if the pain is persisting, then the full workup ultrasound and further on. But there are certain cases of abdominal pain which you cannot manage in this mode. You have to act faster. One is intussusception. Generally, it is a 3 months to 3-year-old child. So what is intussusception? Intussusception is telescoping of one bowel into another bowel. This generally happens in the ileocecal junctions. So this bowel enters into this bowel. So that it is a telescoping of one bowel into another bowel. We can see one bowel is in the cross section, in the longitudinal section. We can see one bowel is inside the other bowel. So generally it happens in a 3 months to 3-year-old child, and there will be blood in stools. In intussusception, the classical picture is there is blood in stools, the red currant jelly appearance of stools. And on the right iliac fossa, a mass is palpable. Since the most common site of intussusception is in the ileocecal junction, there will be a mass in the right iliac fossa to right hypochondrium area. And the ultrasound will show a bowel in bowel appearance. We can see the ultrasound, we can see the target sign or the bowel in one bowel inside the another bowel. This target sign, or they say a pseudo kidney sign, like a kidney in the longitudinal section. You can see a target sign or a pseudo kidney sign in the ultrasound in intussusception. So when a case of intussusception should come, we should inform the pediatric surgeon immediately. Why? Because this is a case for hydrostatic saline reduction under ultrasound guidance. So what is hydrostatic saline reduction? In this, we pass the saline, warm saline, from the distal end of the bowel. That is, this is a setting of hydrostatic saline reduction. We put a Foley's catheter inside the patient's anal canal, and we pass saline from a 3 feet high into the anal canal under the ultrasound guidance. When the saline passes from the anal canal to the cecum, to the ileocecal junction, saline pocket pass from the anal canal to the ileocecal junction, the bowel will get slowly reduced like this. The intussusception will get reduced. So in case of an intussusception, when we find an ultrasound report of intussusception, generally these patients comes from the periphery with an ultrasound report of an intussusception, or we find a 3 months to 3-year-old child with blood in stools, we have to get an ultrasound initially itself, then go in for a hydrostatic saline reduction. You inform the duty MO, he will do a hydrostatic saline reduction. So next is a proven case of appendicitis. That is, clinically it is appendicitis, ultrasoundologically it is appendicitis. There is no doubt that it is appendicitis. Still, we should do all the steps. That is, we should go for evac enema, paracetamol suppository, NPO, IV fluids, investigations. All the steps should be done, but there is no need for waiting for 2 hours, because we know that the pain is not due to constipation. Our only treatment is, if there is a loaded colon, we can evacuate it. So if it is a proven case of appendicitis, do all the steps, but don't wait for 2 hours. Now, next is common cause is acute scrotum. So what are the causes for acute scrotum? Acute scrotum, when the patient comes with testicular pain, we are most concerned whether it is a torsion testis. If you don't explore the scrotum within 6 to 8 hours, the testis can go in for a gangrene. So we lose the testis. The patient will have to go for an orchidectomy. If we can do before it, if we can act urgently, we can detour the testis and save the life of the testis. Save the testis. So other causes are torsion appendage of testis, where the appendage of testis is what we can see the gangrenous appendage of testis, or we can see the inflammation of epididymis and testis, that is the acute epididymo-orchitis. So how will we distinguish between this? To distinguish between this, we have to take a Doppler ultrasound. In Doppler ultrasound, if there is no vascularity, we can see this red and blue vascularity in the normal testis. If there is no vascularity in the Doppler ultrasound, it means that it is a torsion testis. If there is increased vascularity, there will be epididymo-orchitis. If it is a torsion appendage, the report will generally be acute epididymo-orchitis or inconclusive in case of pediatric cases. So, but when an acute scrotum comes, we should understand that then if there is scalar, rubor, redness, increased temperature, tenderness, that is features of inflammation on one side, on any hemiscrotum or one side of the scrotum, the patient will most probably go in for scrotal exploration. The Doppler ultrasound is many a times only for documentation. So when the patient since the patient is going in for a scrotal exploration, put the patient on NPO, give a paracetamol suppository and send all the preoperative investigations. So this case, when there is acute scrotum, when there is scalar, rubor, dollar tumor, functionalisa, don't wait for any of the Doppler investigation. Put the patient on NPO, paracetamol suppository, preoperative investigations. The Doppler ultrasound is only for documentation. So that is regarding the acute scrotum in case of pediatric cases. In head injury, coming to head injury in adult we go for a GCS, but it is very difficult to calculate the GCS in children unless it is in a very lower score. So GCS we cannot depend too much. So we'll arbitrarily divide into mild head injury, moderate head injury and severe head injury. So this is a practical point of view. Mild head injury, the patient will come as slip and fall. Generally the history will be slip and fall. There are low velocity injuries, slip and fall or fall from bed, and the child will be coming with vomiting. In adult, when we hear that there is vomiting, we always go for the CT scan. In a children, the cause for vomiting is pain. Pain is one of the most common cause for vomiting. So our first step in a low velocity injury is to take the pain out of the equation. So put the patient on NPO for 2 hours, paracetamol for suppository 15 mg per kg, and reassess the patient after 2 hours. If the vomiting is still persisting, then the patient is most of the time in low velocity injuries, the vomiting will get decreased and the patient will become active and alert. If the vomiting is persisting for more than 2 hours, then there is a chance for head injury. Then go for a CT scan. Next, now let us discuss about the other end of the spectrum, the severe head injury group. These are the patients which comes with ongoing seizures, loss of consciousness. The patient when presenting, the patient will be there will be no consciousness and the breathing is not stable, or there will be apnea in between. So in these patients, don't be in a rush to run to the CT scan. The GCS will be less than 8. So in those patients, don't rush for CT scan. The primary, get the patient into a setting where there can be intubation, like the red zone in the casualty, or maybe to the pediatric ICU which is nearby, whether there is personnel and equipment for intubation. So first, airway, breathing, circulation. Make sure that these three are stable. Make sure the spine of the patient is also preserved, protected. Now go for the secondary survey from the head to foot examination, chest, abdomen, pelvis and spine and the limbs. Many a times when there is a severe head injury, we tend to forget the secondary survey or the examination of the chest, abdomen and pelvis. Once airway, breathing, circulation is complete, and we look for a secondary survey and to see which all organs may be affected, whether there is abdominal injury, whether there is chest injury. So we can plan our investigations accordingly. Most of the cases in pediatric surgery, abdominal injuries will generally go conservative. Chest injuries also will generally go conservative. Maybe an ICD insertion may be required, but in general, abdominal and thoracic injury generally go conservative if there is no severe hypotension. So coming back to head injury, if there is severe head injury, intubate the patient, then only admit the patient. Then when you go for the CT scan, accompany the patient with an ambu bag with an adrenaline atropine and accompany the patient to the CT scan. So this is the method of treating severe head injury in casualty. Next, there are head injuries which come in between. The moderate head injury, they are generally road traffic accidents. The patient will have a history of seizures. There is no ongoing seizures, but there will be a history of seizures. There will be a definite history of loss of consciousness, and there may be a big soft tissue injury, scalp. So, road traffic accidents, the seizures. In these patients, what happens is we cannot send these patients home without a CT scan. So in order to discharge this patient, we may have to take a CT scan. So put the patient in, most of the time these cases may go in for admission also. Put the patient on NPO, IV fluids, because they may require NPO for more than 2 hours. Whenever you are planning NPO for more than 2 hours, put an IV cannula. Paracetamol supposedly 15 mg per kg and go for a CT head. So in the CT head, if there is any finding, admit the patient. If there is no finding, keep the patient under observation room, observe the patient for 24 hours and let the duty MO decide whether to discharge or admit the patient. So that is regarding the head injury. Now coming to the burns. Burns in pediatric surgery is very common. So what to do when a burns patient comes? It can be either dry burns per se, or it can be due to hot water scalds. So when to admit a burns patient? When the patient is less than 1 year of age, or the body surface area of burns is more than 10%, or whether there is a thick skin burns, or when there is facial burns. In all these cases, we have to admit the patient. Most often in a tertiary care setup, only these type of cases will come. Most of the cases of burns will be for admission. But when you are in a primary center, when you are in a primary health center, you can see which all these are there and then decide on whether to refer the patient or not, or to admit the patient or not. So in this we are seeing that there should be more than, if it is more than 10% body surface area burns, then we have to admit. So how will we calculate the percentage of burns in pediatric patients? In adults, we know the rule of 9 or the rule of Wallace. In pediatric surgical patients, it is difficult, and it is difficult to remember the burns percentage also. So don't try to remember it very much. Let us understand what is the concept behind it, and then let us apply it. So what we require is we need a Lund-Browder chart. The Lund-Browder chart. So whenever going to a pediatric surgery casualty, download the Lund-Browder chart in your mobile phone and then only go, because it will be required to assess the percentage of burns. And it is, don't try to remember it very much. It is difficult to remember. So what is this Lund-Browder chart? What is the essence behind it? So in pediatric surgical patients, there is, we know that there is a head is comparatively large and there is limbs. As the child grows, the percentage of burns occupied by percentage of the total body surface area occupied the head becomes less, and as the child grows, the percentage of the body surface area occupied by the limbs becomes more. So in the limb of the child will occupy less percentage body surface area in a younger age group compared to a adult man, whereas that, suppose the head of the child, say it occupies around 16% in the infancy, and in case of when it becomes, then the person become adult, the head only occupies 9% of the total body surface area. So this is depicted in the chart of Lund-Browder chart. So depending upon the Lund-Browder chart, you calculate the percentage of burns. In adult, the palm of the man is around 1%. In child's palm is around 2.5%. So which all area which is not coming under the Lund-Browder chart, you calculate with the palm of the child, and it is around 2.5%. Don't try to completely assess the percentage by the palm itself. Always use Lund-Browder chart for assessment of burns. Now, we have to write the orders in the case sheet or the OP ticket based upon the percentage of burns. So how will we write orders? In orders, what all should we have? We should have IV fluids. So what is the deficit fluid? How will we calculate the deficit fluid of burns? That is 4 into percentage of burns into body weight. Suppose it is a 10% of burns and it's a 10 kg child, 4 into 10 into 10 is 400 ml. That is the deficit fluid. If the child is not taking orally, you may have to give maintenance fluid according to Holiday-Sagard formula. So the deficit fluid plus the maintenance fluid should be given to child. Generally, these burns patients will be taking orally. So only the deficit fluid may be required to be given. And half of the fluid should be given in the first 8 hours, and the next half should be given in the next 16 hours. This first 8 hours is from the time of burns, not from the time after you see the patient. It is from the time of the burns. So we have to record the time of the burns and calculate the fluid accordingly. Half of the fluid in the first 8 hours, and the next in the next 16 hours, the rest of the burns. The choice of fluids, generally in the first 8 hours you can give normal saline or half normal saline, and then you can give isolate P. Again there is a debate, or you can give altogether you can give ringer lactate. Again there is a debate regarding the choice of fluid, but for practical purposes isolate P is fine. Now analgesics, after fluids analgesics should be given. Paracetamol suppository 15 mg per kg. Antacids can be given. Ranitidine at the range of 1 mg per kg per dose BD. Then for adequate analgesia, sedatives like injection pethidine 1 mg per kg should be given, and associated with along with pethidine in order to prevent vomiting, injection phenergan 0.5 mg per kg should be given. Silverex for in the application of the body, whenever there is burns in the body, silver sulfadiazine cream or a Silverex cream should be given for application of the local application in the body. And in the face you should not apply the silver containing creams because it can cause a blue discoloration. So you should give soframycin cream for local application in the face. And we should, when there is facial burns, make sure that the patient is not going to respiratory distress, and always add nebulization with salbutamol, and sometimes Dexona may be also required in facial burns if it is significant. Dexamethasone. Now coming to the foreign bodies. Next common thing is the foreign bodies in case of pediatric surgery. Children are notorious to ingest and aspirate foreign bodies. So we should know how to manage the foreign bodies. Let us start with the foreign body esophagus. See, this is a coin in the esophagus. In the X-ray, when we take an X-ray, in the anteroposterior view, a coin in the esophagus is seen like the, in the anteroposterior view, it appears like the moon. But when in the lateral view, the coin appears in this type of view, the coin will appear like a 1. Okay. So why? Because there is trachea anteriorly in the esophagus. There is trachea anteriorly and the vertebra posteriorly. So we have the trachea anteriorly and the vertebra posteriorly. So the orientation of the coin will be like this, showing this circle appearance in the anteroposterior view, giving the circle appearance in the anteroposterior view. Whereas it is the exact opposite in case of the trachea. You see a coin in trachea in the anteroposterior view will appear like a 1, and in the lateral view will appear like a moon. Okay. So in the anteroposterior view like a 1, and in the lateral view will appear like a moon. So why it is like that? Because the slit of the trachea is like this, vocal cords are like this anteroposteriorly. So the coin can only pass through the trachea in the anteroposterior, like that only, in this orientation only, in the trachea. So this is the classical appearance of coin in the esophagus and the trachea. So whenever you have a foreign body, you should take both an anteroposterior view and a lateral view to make sure the position of the coin or the foreign body. So that is the importance of the lateral view in case of a foreign body. Here we have a very demonic mother here eating the child, and here we have a very loving mother. That is the importance of two views, the anteroposterior view and the lateral view in case of a foreign body. Now coming to the foreign body esophagus. So when in foreign body esophagus, you can see the moon appearance in the anteroposterior view. So in the esophageal foreign body, when we see an X-ray, what all should we see? We can see the esophagus, the position of the esophagus. Then there is the diaphragm here. We can see the diaphragm here, diaphragmatic downs. Okay. So and here is the cricopharyngeal sphincter. A coin can be lying near can be trapped near the cricopharyngeal sphincter. Then it can be trapped near the tracheal bifurcation, but it is not very common generally. Then it will be in the junction between the diaphragm and the junction just above the diaphragm at the cardia, and or it can be in the abdomen. So these are the generally three positions where we see a foreign body in the anteroposterior view, foreign body esophagus. So most common foreign body is a coin. So when we see a foreign body esophagus here, what should we do? When we see a foreign body esophagus here near the cricopharyngeal sphincter, we can try a Foley's catheter removal. What will we do? We put in a Foley's catheter like this. We put in the Foley's catheter. This is the coin here. We inflate the bulb and pull the Foley's catheter to bring the coin out. Oh, that appears very easy. No, it is not actually that easy. It is not actually that easy because it is a struggle in a when the child is conscious. Anyway, it is doable, and since it can be done with minimal sedation, it is good. But make sure don't do without the presence of a pediatric surgeon, because if the Foley's bulb is hyperinflated or if the pull is a bit violent, it can cause esophageal rupture. So only do it under the presence of a very competent personnel in pediatric surgery. Now the coin can be here at the level of the cardia, just above the diaphragm. Also, sorry, before that, suppose it is not possible to pull this coin by the Foley. Then we have to remove the coin by direct laryngoscopy. This is done under general anesthesia. We can put a direct laryngoscopy when with the help of a Magill's forceps we can remove the coin from the trachea, from the esophagus. Now suppose the coin is here, banana. Yes, because most of the, if the coin is able to pass the cricopharyngeal sphincter, it will pass the diaphragm also, it will pass the cardiac junction also. So if we give a banana, most of the time the coin will come down to the stomach. So suppose if the coin is inside the abdomen, then what should we do? Then what we can do is we can send the patient home with the advice that to see whether the coin is passing in the stools or not, and to review if the review after 1 week if the coin is not passed in the stools. So this is the casualty management of foreign body esophagus, especially if it is a coin. But what if it is not a coin? No child can assure you that he will only eat coins. Sometimes they can eat button battery. Button battery is disastrous. Why? It is not like a coin. It appears like a coin in X-ray. It appears like a coin when we see. It appears like a coin for the child also. But button battery, this is a button battery in the small intestine. It has a positive and negative charge, and an eddy current will pass between the positive and negative charge in the button battery. So what happens when there is eddy current? When the current passes, there will be ulceration. This ulceration can get deepened when the button battery stays in that position, and it can cause ulceration and perforation. So unlike coin, button battery is really dangerous. So what can we do? So suppose anyway button battery is here and above the diaphragm or inside the abdomen, the patient has to go in for admission. The patient has to be admitted. In this, and we have to remove the button battery as early as possible. Suppose in here we have to go for the esophagoscopy. Button battery, if the near the cricopharyngeal sphincter, we have to go for the esophagoscopy. We can see the endotracheal tube and the rigid esophagoscope, and we can put an instrument to the rigid esophagoscope and remove the button battery. If the button battery is here above at the cardiac junction, then also we have to go for the esophagoscopy. We cannot keep the button battery there. It is going to perforate. It is dangerous. Suppose button battery is here in the abdomen, just past the stomach, then what to do? We have to observe the patient. We have to admit the patient and observe the patient for perforation. We can also give a syrup smooth so that the button battery does not stay in a constant position. Follow up the patient with X-ray and make sure that the button battery has passed, and then only send the patient home. Otherwise, there is a high chance of perforation in case of button battery. Next is other foreign bodies. Children are eating, sometimes they are favorite of their earring. They may have their earring. So this is one such a case. So unlike coin, it may get stuck. Unlike coin, it may get stuck in the esophagus. It does not go just like that. We cannot remove with Foley's bulb also. So if it is anywhere in the esophagus from the cricopharyngeal sphincter to cardia, we have to go for an esophagoscopy and removal of the button battery. If it is below that, then we cannot do anything. We can send the patient home. Again, look for the foreign body in the stools. Review if it is not coming after 1 week. Again, take a rapid chest X-ray, see whether the coin is going or not. Like that we can manage. So if the non-coin foreign bodies in the esophagus, it just passed down to the stomach, we can send the patient home. But let this discharge be done by the pediatric surgery MO. You can keep the patient in OR and let the discharge be done by the pediatric surgery MO. But these are the patients which we can send home. Next is the foreign body bronchus. Unlike foreign body esophagus, foreign body bronchus is dangerous. The classical history will be a child which is less than 5 years. When the peanut is inside the mouth, he cries, and after that, 1 hour after that, the patient has a respiratory distress, or there is breathlessness while the patient is talking, or there is a stridor for the patient. This is the classical history of the foreign body bronchus. So mind you, if there is a child less than 5 years at home, don't bite peanut at home, because it is dangerous. Why? Because how will we know? The mother may not be sure. Suppose this classical history, we may not get this classical history. Sometimes the elder sister might have given the peanut. Sometimes the boy next door might have given the peanut. So we may not get this classical history. So in those cases, we go for the chest examination, or the air entry will be decreased on one side, on the bronchus where the foreign body is lodged. So in the X-ray, on that side, this is the normal line. On that side, where there is foreign body, the air cannot come out. So there is air trapping in that lung. So there will be hyperinflation of the lung. Due to the hyperinflation, there will be increased radiolucency, and again due to the hyperinflation, there will be the flattened right diaphragm. And due to the hyperinflation, again there will be a mediastinal shift towards the opposite side. So these are the parameters which we see in the foreign body bronchus in the chest X-ray. So suppose we see these findings in the chest X-ray, and the air entry will be decreased on this side of hyperlucency. So suppose we are seeing clinical examination, history, and the chest X-ray findings are suggestive of foreign body, then we have to go for a bronchoscopy. So in these patients, keep these patients on a NPO, send full preoperative workup, and keep the patient ready for bronchoscopy. So we remove it by bronchoscopy. In this scenario, you see that there is no endotracheal tube for this patient, because it is a bronchoscopy. You are putting the bronchoscope directly into the trachea of the patient. So at that point, when the bronchoscope is introduced, the respiration of the patient, even though there is an air channel for respiration in the bronchoscope, the respiration of the patient is compromised. So these patients during this procedure can go in for a cardiac arrest, and this is a really serious procedure. So always make sure that in your home or in a home where there is a child less than 5 years, avoid peanuts, avoid those type of foreign bodies, avoid those type of foods which the child cannot chew well. Peanut is exactly notorious for it. So that is regarding the foreign body bronchus. So keep the patient on NPO, send full blood investigations, keep the patient ready for bronchoscopy. Now minor soft tissue injuries. Why minor soft tissue injuries? Suturing. It's only suturing now. But pediatric suturing is not like adult suturing. In adults, the adult may suffer the pain and stand alone, and you can take your sweet time and suture. And someone will be there to teach also if you are novice. But in case of suturing, in case of pediatric surgery casualty, it's difficult, because most of the times the MO on call will be in operation theatre, and since he is senior, most of the time he may not come down to the casualty for minor suturing. So even if when you are a house surgeon, if you call the MO, he will say you suture. And sometimes, especially when the person is on the first day of house surgery, he will find it difficult if he has a pediatric surgery casualty for suturing. So these type of suturing happens only in your dreams. It is very difficult. If there is only if there is adequate personnel and adequate time, we can do this type of suturing when the child is very much pacified, mildly sedated, and he is sitting like that in the lap of the father. In an Indian scenario, in our Kerala scenario, it is not like this. Most probably what will happen is the child will be screaming. And there should be two people. One person should hold the hands of the child like this, and the other person should hold the knees of the child. There should be a nursing assistant for you to give the suture materials and and then you suture the patient. And many a times, because of the child is screaming, you cannot take your own sweet time for suturing. You may have to be a bit fast. Moreover, the suture materials which you used should be generally in the adult surgical casualty, you may be using the 2-0 suture material. But in the pediatric surgery casualty, you may be using the 3-0 suture material or a 4-0 nylon, 4-3-0 or 4-0 suture material. And it will be a bit difficult. So before coming to pediatric surgery casualty, if you don't know suturing, make sure that you suture in some orange or somewhere, and make sure that you know the suturing. And while suturing, make sure that there is adequate personnel to hold the hand of the patient and hold the knee of the patient, and the nursing assistant should be there to give you suture materials and the betadine and all. So that is regarding the minor soft tissue injuries in pediatric surgery casualty. Now coming to the newborn. Newborn is a terror, because many a times, especially a novice, you won't understand whether this newborn has a problem or not. What is a normal newborn? How will you understand that when the newborn is coming with either crying or sleeping, whether this newborn is normal or not? It is difficult. So, but we have to ask some questions. The minimum questions we can ask are whether the child has passed urine. Most of the children will pass urine within 24 hours. Okay. Whether the child has passed meconium. Sometimes the mother will show stools like that. This is called meconium. The first stools before the milk stools. Milk stools are yellow, and before that it is meconium. So suppose there is this meconium. Suppose the child has passed meconium, it is normal. And the child should, 95% of the children will pass meconium within 24 hours of delivery. And whether the child is breastfeeding adequately. The third question is whether the child is breastfeeding adequately. How will we know that the breastfeeding is adequate? Whether the child is passing urine. The child should pass urine. The newborn should pass urine around 8 times a day. And every 2 hours he or she should be breastfeeding. So based on these factors, we can get a small idea as a house surgeon. We can get a small idea whether a child is whether a newborn is normal or not. If this part is abnormal, the newborn is definitely abnormal. Newborn or the neonate is definitely abnormal. But even if all these are normal, then also the child can have problems. Then also the neonate can have problems. So how will we make sure that the neonate has no problem? Show the newborn to a pediatrician or a neonatologist. He will be available in the NICU. Only a person who is trained in the newborn care will know the subtle changes of the newborn. So to make sure that the patient has the newborn is normal when he comes with a complaint, make sure that the newborn is shown to a pediatrician or a neonatologist. Don't manage completely by yourself. In the periphery, you may have this question, but then you can show a pediatrician. So, what are the newborn emergencies which the pediatric surgeon has to encounter, or as a house surgeon in the pediatric surgery casualty, which you may see? So don't bother about too much about it, because whenever you are going to see a newborn, you will be saying, show it to the neonatologist, show it to the pediatrician, like that. But you should know certain disorders. You should not miss certain disorders, because you will make a sorry figure cut out. So just see this like you see an album, because most of the time the patient will be coming with these pictures in their hand, with these x-rays. The newborn will be referred from the periphery and they may have this x-ray in hand. So they'll just go through the pictures. Go through this like as you see an album. One is anorectal malformation. The child will have abdominal distension. On looking the perineum, there will be no anal opening. Don't miss that. We will cut a very sorry figure. Don't miss anorectal malformations. Next is tracheoesophageal fistula. The child will be have feeding intolerance, coughing, salivation. There will be esophageal atresia. The esophagus will not be grown, and there will be a tracheoesophageal fistula. You can see the tracheoesophageal fistula here. So how will we diagnose a tracheoesophageal fistula? The infant will have most probably have an X-ray with it. You can see a newborn will have an X-ray with the newborn. You can see the coiling of the infant feeding tube or the Ryle's tube in the esophagus. Because it is a blind ending like that, the Ryle's tube will, when we put an infant feeding tube, it will curve like that and go upwards. The coiling of the infant feeding tube or a Ryle's tube in the esophagus is pathognomonic of a tracheoesophageal fistula or esophageal atresia. Next is congenital diaphragmatic hernia. This is a normal diaphragm here. When there is a diaphragmatic defect, in diaphragmatic hernia there will be a hole in the diaphragm. Diaphragm will not be fully developed. There will be a diaphragmatic defect. The bowel is inside the chest. So the child will be in a respiratory distress or will be in a ventilator, and you can see the bowel loops in the chest in congenital diaphragmatic hernia. Next is a duodenal atresia. We can see the atretic segment of the duodenum here. Atretic segment of the duodenum. So in duodenal atresia, the stomach will be dilated and the duodenum will be dilated. So this is the dilated stomach. In the X-ray we can see a dilated stomach and a dilated duodenum. So there are two air bubbles. So that is the double bubble sign in duodenal atresia. So the stomach will be dilated, the duodenum will be dilated. So double bubble sign in duodenal atresia. In case of a jejunal atresia, the stomach will be dilated, the duodenum will be dilated, and the jejunum will be dilated. So in case of a proximal jejunal atresia, there will be a triple bubble sign: stomach, duodenum, and the jejunum. All these are dilated in jejunal atresia. Whereas in ileal atresia, there will be multiple bowel loops will be dilated, and there will be an absence of rectal gas shadow. Absence of rectal gas shadow is down here. Absence of rectal gas shadow down here. So multiple bowel loops may be dilated and absence of rectal gas shadow. So this may indicate a obstruction. This may indicate an atresia or an obstruction inside the bowel. So duodenal atresia, jejunal atresia, ileal atresia. Next is gastroschisis. In this case, there will be a defect in the abdominal wall and all the bowel will be protruding out and without any sac. So this is a gastroschisis which we are going to see. Don't get alarmed. Nothing to do then. Only surgical repair. Cover the bowel. Send the patient to NICU. And next is the Hirschsprung's disease. Similar to anorectal malformation, it can present with abdominal distension. But when we look at the perineum, there will be anal opening. So the diagnosis is by contrast study, which is beyond the limits of this presentation. But what basically it is, you should understand that there will be in Hirschsprung's disease, there will be the problem is neural problem. There will be a dilated bowel here, and below that, because of the absence of ganglion cells, there will be a constricted bowel. And even though there is a bowel there, even though there is a patent bowel there, it will be constricted, and the stools will not be passed, causing a functional obstruction in Hirschsprung's disease. So all these things will come to a casualty. But whatever it is, always make sure that you should show it to a neonatologist before sending the patient, neonatologist or a pediatrician. So let us go through the photo album once more because it is important. You'll always forget it is heavily loaded. Anorectal malformations, no anal openings. Esophageal atresia, coiling of the pube. Then congenital diaphragmatic hernia, there is bubble inside the chest cavity. Duodenal atresia, dilated stomach, dilated duodenum, double bubble appearance. Jejunal atresia, dilated stomach, dilated duodenum, dilated jejunum, triple bubble appearance. And in ileal atresia, multiple dilated bubble loops and air fluid level, multiple dilated bubble loops and absence of rectal gas. Gastroschisis, defect in the abdominal wall. Hirschsprung's disease, abdominal distension, but there is no anorectal malformation, and it has to be confirmed by contrast studies. So that is regarding the newborn. So these are the cases which will come into the pediatric surgery casualty. So to review what we have learned: abdominal pain, remember NPO for 2 hours, evac enema, reassess, intussusception and a proven case of appendicitis are the exceptions in those cases. Acute scrotum, clinical examination is primarily important. If there is scalar Ruber dollar tumor punctuosa, the patient may have to go for scrotal exploration. So put the patient on NPO, send the investigations, and make sure that the Doppler is taken, but it is only for documentation purposes. Foreign bodies, AP and lateral view. We have to think about foreign body esophagus, coin, button battery, other foreign body aspiration, peanut, X-ray features of foreign body aspiration, bronchoscopy. Then head injury and trauma, you have to make sure that whether it is a minor head injury or a severe head injury or the head injury is in between, and do accordingly and do use the CT in a correct way or in a prudent manner. Don't take CT for every child which comes as vomiting. Vomiting in a child can be due to a pain. So rule out or take the pain away from the equation, and then only take CT scan if the vomiting is persisting. Burns, percentage calculation, Lund Browder chart, indications for admission. Then minor soft tissue injuries, learn suturing beforehand. And newborn, always show the pediatrician or the neonatologist and be acquainted with certain cases of newborn. So that is regarding the management of pediatric surgery casualty. I hope that you can turn this crying child into a happy child in the pediatric surgery casualty. Thank you. Have a good pediatric surgery casualty, and remember all these topics when you sit in a pediatric surgery casualty. Thank you. Bye bye.